Hello there and welcome back to the PPM Historian on the AXELOS YouTube channel, where I talk about project management methodologies and apply them to historic events because it's vaguely entertaining. Let me ask you something. What's the happiest place on earth? It's Disneyland. In California specifically. I have to say in California specifically because today's story is specifically about the Disneyland in California specifically. Today we're going to talk about the chaotic opening of what was supposed to be the happiest place on earth, and it wasn't during the opening period. After it hit its stride, it was a very happy place, but at first there were lots of unhappy people there. In fact, the opening of Disneyland in California was actually referred to as Black Sunday later on, and that gives you a good impression of just how chaotic this opening was. So let's have a proper look at the opening and see just how a Prince 2 project manager might have solved a few of the issues that occurred. So we'll start with Disney's unrealistic timelines, and this is something that most project managers will already be familiar with. But the executive in this situation, Walt Disney, wanted the park to be opened as soon as possible. He's not the how guy, he's the open it now guy. Right. And Disneyland was indeed opened 1 year and 1 day from the announcement, 17th of July 1955. However, this tight timeline meant that not everything was ready, and that may be an understatement. Now, in project management terms, these tight timelines meant that all of this should have been recorded in an issue register with an associated issue report for each specific issue. Lots of issues going on. Now, there are three types of issue report. There's a request for change to a baseline product, there's off specification, and finally there are positive/negative problems and concerns. Because issues aren't always negative, they're just things that are. Now, these three types of issue reports are essential to capturing the details of an issue. They should describe it, assess it, and recommend a solution. See, projects are always a trade-off between different aspects, and Prince 2 refers to these as variables, of which there are 6. Time, cost, scope, quality, benefits, risk. Just like that. You'd think I'd have it written down. Now, Disneyland, which we are talking about today, we're not just talking about project management, is a classic example of time being prioritised over risk, scope, and quality. And there are plenty of examples to back up what I'm saying. No landscaping had been done, meaning gardening. So the trees that were already there, they just put signs on them with the Latin names to make it seem like they should be there. And asphalt, or tarmac, if you're from where I'm from, had only been laid the morning of the opening, so it meant that it was still soft and hot, and women's high heels actually sank into it. Essentially, workers were kind of running all over the place. Even things that had been painted weren't dry yet. So all the project management had just gone out the window. Now, the launch date was highly ambitious. They had a year and a day to get it done. So I'm not entirely sure that a project manager, even a Prince 2 project manager, would have solved that issue. So let's call that a negative concern. So it's something that we're concerned about that may have a negative impact on the project eventually, but not necessarily something that we're going to address immediately because maybe we can't. And in this case, we can't. Walt Disney's the boss. He says a year. We've got a year. And considering some of the last minute work, it's basically the same situation. Now, had they conducted an assessment, they probably would have come up with the idea that it has a potential for reputational damage, which would be unhappy park visitors in the happiest place on earth. Who knew it was possible to be unhappy in the happiest place on earth while your feet are stuck to the tarmac asphalt? And that's quite a significant risk. And proposals in response to that assessment may have been, let's make it look like this is how it's supposed to be, which is what they did with the landscaping. And maybe the tight deadline was also responsible for the gas leak that nearly burnt down Sleeping Beauty's castle. You can only hope that she wasn't sleeping at the time. It was a terrible joke. I apologise. Now, going back to the issue register and reports, this would probably be considered an off-specification issue, as surely the gas suppliers would provide some sort of leak-free provision. If you're installing gas, the one thing you don't want it to do is leak. Same principle as a bath. Now, let's keep that gas leak in mind and go back to our 3-step process of assess, propose and implement. Now, assessing is obviously a severe impact. You don't want a gas leak in a theme park. You don't really want a gas leak anywhere, but you especially don't want it in the happiest place on earth. So let's call that severe impact. Now, my proposal would be to turn the gas off and fix it immediately. And then making a decision about how to implement that change, well, anyone who's around who can offer approval at the time probably would do, because it's a gas leak, and I can't think of a logical reason as to why you wouldn't approve a repair to that, because let's be honest, probably going to traumatise a lot of children if you allow Sleeping Beauty's castle to burn down on the first day. Didn't happen in the film, shouldn't happen in real life. Another major issue that faced the opening of the California Disneyland was that there were simply too many people there. Just like the bridge that we talked about Earlier, the 17th of July opening day was supposed to be for international press and invited guests, around 11,000 people. Turns out it was a little bit more than that. It was closer to 28,000, which is, I believe, more than double 11. And these 28,000 people came into the park waving their tickets around, and around 50% of those tickets were counterfeit, fake, not real, shouldn't have been accepted. And this mass of people trying to get to the park caused a huge traffic jam. And people were stuck in their cars for so long that, understandably, they eventually had to, let's say, relieve themselves in the car park, or the parking lot for our American friends. And another problem they faced was that the park was just too entertaining and people refused to leave. They needed a last orders bell, and the tickets had time slots on them, meaning morning or afternoon. But the people who were supposed to only be there for the morning conveniently forgot that they were only supposed to be there for the morning, so they were still there when the people arrived for the afternoon, which meant that the park became more overcrowded as the day went on and the issue got worse. And on top of that, the vendors eventually ran out of food because they've got more than twice the number of people that they were expecting there. And the organisers really should have been aware of this very significant risk and perhaps taken action in order to prevent it becoming an issue, which it did. I'm talking about it now. And if we go back to project management terms, this issue could likely be considered a request for change, as we'd increase from the baseline of 11,000 people up to 28,000. And to assess that situation, you probably would ask the question, what happens if we turn away more than half of these people? You probably have a fair number of unhappy Disney fans. Perhaps no longer fans, they're just Disney people. Not even Disney, just people. They just become people. And that's not necessarily something you want, especially when more than half of those people are probably media. And thus the proposal is, let them in and keep them happy, which is what they did. Tried to keep them happy. Failed spectacularly, but they gave it a go. And apparently Walt Disney himself wasn't aware of most of these issues occurring because he was preoccupied with the live broadcast, which we'll come to in a minute, because that wasn't flawless by any stretch of the imagination. So whoever made the decisions on that day, it wasn't him. Even though it was such a major issue, Disney probably should have been involved. And implementing the solution was the easiest part, because they essentially just didn't refuse entry to anyone and didn't make anyone leave. So almost the same as doing nothing. There was also a strike action, because even a magical place like Disney World isn't exempt from industrial action. On the press day, which is the opening day that we're talking about now, there was a plumber's strike that was ongoing, which caused more issues because plumbing is fairly essential to the opening of a theme park, especially if you've got water rides. They probably have extra drainage in the car park, thinking about it. There simply wasn't enough functioning plumbing, which is, plumbers are integral to functional plumbing. Now this, unlike the other examples we talked about, is one where the boss did get involved, the boss being Walt Disney. He captured the problem, which was a request for change, and he assessed the situation, that being that they could either have functioning toilets or they could have functioning water fountains. And then he proposed and decided for himself. That being they have vendors selling food and drinks, so it was much more important to have functioning toilets. And the solution, that being go for the toilets, was very quickly implemented. Now, let's talk about the live broadcast for a moment. ABC was doing a live 90-minute broadcast of the opening, and at the time, it was one of the largest and most complex live broadcasts in history. This is 1955 we're talking about. There were around 90 million people watching this on their TVs. It's lucky they didn't show up to the park. And in the broadcast, 3 of Walt's closest friends were participating. Those being Art Linkletter, Bob Cummings, and Ronald Reagan. That Ronald Reagan. And yes, with the live broadcast there were also some issues, otherwise I probably wouldn't mention it. Bob Cummings, previously mentioned, was caught on camera kissing a dancer. Guests tripped over cables and stepped in front of the cameras, and at one point Linkletter lost his microphone, which he needs to be heard. And when Disney himself approached a plaque to read an inscription to the audience live via broadcast, he stopped midway through a sentence and said, "I thought I got a signal," and then started again, which apparently he didn't get a signal. And honestly, in this situation, I could say that a project manager probably wouldn't have helped, because we all know that during a live broadcast, everything can go wrong in an instant. And a lot of the time, there's not a lot you can do about it. That is, even if you've rehearsed everything and you know the inside and outs of every broadcast position, there's still going to be issues that occur that are well beyond your control. But I would hope that they conducted a lessons learned session immediately following these issues. That way they can capture all the problems and discuss the experience that they gained from it in order to make their future products more successful. Now, with everything that went wrong that day, Walt Disney really wanted to be on the safe side moving forward. And he invited the press back for a second, more private opening of the park to experience Disneyland as it was meant to be. Probably because he was using a lessons learned approach. This probably wasn't, but let's say he was. And in the end, the 17th of July became Disneyland's official birthday, even though park opened officially the day after. And I wouldn't want to celebrate an anniversary of an event like this, but that's why I'm not the head of Disney. Within several weeks of this day, more than 1 million people had visited Disneyland. Not to say that everything was perfect moving forward. There was that occasion where a tiger and a panther escaped from an attraction and then engaged in a furious death struggle, which to me sounds like an amazing band name. So that's all I have to say today about issue registers, project management and Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. If you want to see more of this type of content, make sure you subscribe to the AXELOS YouTube channel and keep an eye out for the live broadcasts we're doing. There's lots of useful information that you can learn about all of our different best practice products. See you next time.